Welcome to A Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach with Mark Gellard and Candy Reed, sponsored by the ERT 300. Welcome to the latest edition of Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach, which of course these days is sponsored by the ERT 300. And don't forget, if you would like 10% off, just go to the ERT 300 website and put in tennis podcast. It's an amazing little device. I'm sure you'll agree. Mark and the other professional coaches use it on the tour. It's used on both the WTA and the ATP tours. I'm sure it will be used here at the US Open. So go and check out that handy little device, which tells you exactly when you need your rackets restringing. Mark, we join you. It's the first week of US Open qualifying. You're at home after Cincinnati. Just give us a brief synopsis of how you think Magda's playing, the results, and what you've been doing since getting home for a few days.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for listening as always. I think, yes, it's always a hectic time of year on the hard courts because normally players get that rest after Wimbledon. But this year with the Olympics being as they were, we didn't get that opportunity. They weren't afforded a vacation like they normally are. So Toronto and Cincinnati, really good for us. Results, always want them to be better. We didn't go as far as we wanted, but I'm really encouraged with the way we're playing and our mindset. And I can feel we're confident right now. So I'm hoping that moving forwards, US Open's tricky. You don't know who you get first round. You're going to need some luck of the draw, I suppose. But overall, really pleased with our efforts and the way we're playing right now. So hopefully we can continue to build on that.
And how is Magda's body? How is her mind holding up, given that you're right? I mean, this is such a busy part of the season.
Yeah, so as soon as we got back down to Florida on Saturday evening, I believe, we had a physio out here on Sunday at the place we stay. So just trying to get her some help physically so that she can be ready for the upcoming tournaments. And obviously the mind and body are really important for tennis. And as we say that, here's John. So I'll stop talking and let someone else more interesting have a go.
How's it going?
Hi, John. Yeah, we've begun the podcast. Hey, Mark and I just talking about what's happened since Cincinnati. He and Magda are back in Florida, just training. So John Williams, let's talk about you now, the coach of Taylor Townsend, who's been doing absolutely superbly recently. And I will apologise to both you and Mark because we did try this about a week ago when Toronto was going on. We had a lovely chat and I forgot to press the red button at set before. So again, full apologies. You'd think I've been doing broadcasting for about 25 years and that is a rookie mistake. So I do apologise, but thank you so much for coming back on.
No problem. Happy to do
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Your volume is a little bit low, John. I don't know if you can get a little bit closer to the monitor.
How does that sound?
There we go. That will probably help. You just have to speak really loudly, I think. Okay. Sounds like. But you can just tell us what you've been doing since Cincinnati wrapped up. You got to the round of 16 with Taylor in the singles, lost to Jessica Pegula. Perhaps you could just start there.
Sure. So since Cincinnati, we've been traveling. Taylor had a couple of days off, and we actually got back on the court today, which is where I'm coming from now. So
where is that? Is that Atlanta?
We are in Atlanta, yes. I did not expect to be back here at all, but it's tennis, so we adjust and we keep moving.
100%. What, John, how long after the tournament do you usually give your Taylor, I should say, after you've had a tough period like this, how long do you give her off before you get her back on the court? I know it varies from player to player, age and things like that, but it's something I'm always trying to balance with Magda and knowing, keeping the physical part healthy, but also giving enough time off mentally, though. So I always feel like I want to go back on the court with her when she says, hey, I'm missing playing or I want to get back on, not sort of forcing her back on the court to keep things going, even when we're playing well. How do you deal with that?
100%. I think it really depends on the type of wear and tear as well as the degree. So as you know, the physical part you can recover from fairly quickly. The psychological, emotional part takes more time. So if a player is worn down mentally and psychologically, that's going to be a different type of rest and probably a different extent of rest. Whereas if they're just beat up physically, Oh, okay. A couple of days in the cold plunge, you do some recovery, you hang around with your friends, lounge around, sleep in a bit, not have to worry about traveling or making having a fixed schedule. And those things resolve themselves pretty quickly. So it really just depends on where we are, what type of fatigue she's dealing with, and then I can kind of um, coach her on the best interventions to snap back from it fairly quickly. Like sometimes I've told her, hey, I don't want to hear from you for 48 hours. I don't want you watching any tennis. I don't want you thinking about tennis. I don't want you interacting with people who are talking about tennis. Just disconnect from it completely because you don't need to be connected to it now. Now is one of the few periods where you can actually be completely removed from it. Do that because and on day 3, we have to be all in again, right? So circumstances.
Who sure who makes that decision for you though? Is that a discussion that you both have, or is it her that sort of makes that decision of how long she's going to have off, or is that you?
That's a great question. So first, it's a collaborative effort. I say we're all a part of the team. Everybody has to play their role. This is a business built around Taylor. The playing of the tennis, that's the corporation, right? So Taylor's the CEO. Um, I'm more of the chief operations officer. So we all have our roles to play, but everybody's input is equally valuable and necessary if we're going to make the business successful as a whole. That's how I view it. So we have the conversation. I ask the questions. Depending on her feedback, I then ask more questions, and then we have a conversation about, hey, I think it's probably about time that you take a day off, or let's do this tomorrow morning and then nothing else for the rest of the day. And she's a workhorse. That's how she's grown up in the sport. So if it's on paper that we're supposed to have 7 training sessions in a 5-day period, she's fully expecting to do all 7 training sessions. Whereas what I've learned over the years is the human body, the physiology, the psychology, it needs to be gelatinous. It's a living, growing thing, just like any other training plan. And if you are always super rigid, then something is just bound to break. So we have to be rigidly flexible, meaning sometimes you have to call an audible. You know what? The body's not having it today. We need to listen to the body, because if the body leaves the chat, then there is no tennis. Right? So
It's interesting because I should have followed up more on the article, but I did read very briefly, and I didn't pay enough attention as I was just rushing through it. Was that Darren Cahill has been discussing Yannick Sinner a little bit recently on what he was lacking, and one of the things he said is that he feels that Yannick needs to toughen up a little bit now. That the tennis is there, but he needs to get tougher. And so, just little things, whether it's stopping in practice for having a blister or for something menial that's not terrible. And so he's trying to get him tougher. I suppose my question for you would be, as a coach, what do you, I liked your analogy with the CEO. I always say with Magda that she's the owner of the ship and I'm the captain. So, she can fire me at any time she wants and everyone else on it. But while I'm, in her team, I'm deciding where we go, right, left, stop, start, accelerate, decelerate. So I like to be largely in control with Magda, and I think she likes that. But how do you, if you feel Taylor's not putting as much in that day as she could, or you're not getting the maximum out of her, do you tend to challenge her on that, or are you more of sort of letting her be in charge, and if she doesn't feel it, you'll let it slide? Good long way to ask you how tough you are, basically.
So I'm laughing because I can't imagine not challenging anybody that I'm working with, because my number one objective is finding the levers, the switches, the buttons to push to get you to perform at a level that you have not obtained, or you've only touched, but there's no sustaining that level. Right? So
Yeah.
yes, I'm always pushing, I'm always pulling, I'm always tugging, I'm always manipulating, I'm creating circumstances and environments to extract what I need to see more of. So if it's a toughness thing, for example, then I'm creating the environment where you have to be tough, where it's going to be very obvious that you're bailing out, right? So if you're bailing out on your shot quality because your legs are tired, or because they're getting heavy, they're locking up, so your footwork is slowing down. Now you're out of position, you're catching the ball a bit late. But I know it's not a swing mechanic thing, right? It's not that you don't understand what you're supposed to be doing. It's physiologically you go into
Yeah.
conservation or survival mode. If that's happening, then I structure the drill where you have to do a suicide first, and then the next ball is coming, right? And
Yep.
if you miss,
Yep. Yep.
quality drops off, then we're all going to know. And then we make
Absolutely.
adjustments from there. And I just set, rather than go back and forth on, hey, you're not putting out enough effort, your effort's dropping off, rather than create an adversarial environment with me and the player, I just create an adversarial environment with the thing that these players do best, and that is compete. So you have to hit 7 in a row, and you have to do it this way. The competition's already, the rules of engagement have already been laid out, right? So now you just have to do it. And then I just coach along the way. Hey, watch that first step. Make your crossover a little bit bigger, more explosive. Do this, do that, do this, do that. So I'm coaching the technique, but they have to put forth the effort. And the reason they want to put forth the effort is because they're competing. And if they don't want to compete, that's a completely different animal. Then you're going home. Because if you're not competing to be better, then we don't need to be here.
Thanks for the
Do you
answer.
think,
So
John, do you think that Taylor's got a more improved mindset, perhaps knows her body a bit better since having a son?
I think the short answer would be yes. I think to expand on that, yes, I think understanding her body a bit better, basically constantly having surprises and having expectations flipped on their head gives you the perspective of saying, okay, well, I'm just gonna go with it, and we'll see what the body's doing today. I'm gonna listen. If it cooperates, great. If it doesn't cooperate, I'm not going to try and fit a square peg in a round hole. But I wish that the knowledge and understanding of the body were a bit better. It would save me some headache at times.
John, one of the things I'm trying to do when we're doing these podcasts and I'm speaking with a lot of different people is, or we both are, me and Candy, is come up with some questions that I think challenge you and give and educate me and the listeners. One of the questions I was thinking about, which I wanted to start asking our guests, was, for me, the way we coach right now is, and I don't mean you and me specifically, I mean just the coaching industry in all sports. We do things a certain way. I feel that if we were to come back in 100 years' time, things will be done very differently to how we're doing them now. So my question for you would be, what do you think the future of tennis coaching is, and how could it be different? Because I'm constantly wondering if this verbal feedback that we're giving is necessary or correct. I think there's probably going to be much more efficient and effective ways to do things in the future. So do you see anything or have any thoughts on that, and what you think might change, or how we might be doing things better in 10 years or 20 years or 100 years?
That's a phenomenal question. That reminds me of a construct that Peter Thiel uses. And he basically challenges the preconceived notions of obstacles and blockages. And the question is, how can you accomplish your 10-year goals in the next 6 months? And it forces you out of that box, right? So ever since I started coaching, I had this mantra that I always want to be 10 years ahead. I always want to be 10 years ahead. And when I was working heavily with track and field athletes, it was constantly, coming up. Oh, well, I was doing that, 8, 9 years ago. I was doing this, so blah, 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 blah. So in my mind, I'm always asking myself that very same question with different iterations. Is there a way that I could be doing this same thing now, but differently, that would produce a greater, more beneficial effect or outcome? So that's a very a roundabout way of answering your question and saying, yes, I do think that the way we coach now will be quote unquote antiquated 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Just looking at some of the technological, quote unquote, advancements, I think that the utilization of tech, data acquisition is going to be even more substantial. We already see the push moving that way now. My fear, and I also find myself asking other coaches as well as myself this question, just because we can, should we? So I could use this, but should I? I could do this, but should I? And I think asking those questions, creating those juxtapositions from a logical, rational, data-driven perspective, but also on the flip side, going right brain here, where the art kind of marries into the coaching process. I think that is a very healthy balance to maintain. So I think coaching is going to be very different. I think it'll be much more data-driven. I think it'll be much more analytical in terms of we'll start looking at, joint angles and racket head positions and string tensions and how all of that relates to RPMs imparted on the ball on a forehand. And what that is going to then create for the next shot, et cetera, et cetera. I think we will get very, very micro when it comes to things like that, because that's the direction that coaching has been evolving or devolving into, depending on what position you take. I think the danger is losing the art, because AI doesn't teach us how to talk to people. AI doesn't increase our EQ. It doesn't increase our ability to communicate and understand nonverbal communication, to read cues. And just because you can see it doesn't mean you can effectively manage it. That takes time. That takes reps. It takes quality reps. And if we are relying so heavily on the data, I mean, we kind of see it now, right? Certain matches, the coaches are not watching the match. They're looking at the tablet the majority of the time. Well,
yeah, then you're losing that connection with the player. I used to do it a lot. Sorry to cut you off there, but when I used to take a lot more notes and write things down, but I found then you lose that connection with the player during the match. And during the match, which was actually going to take me to my final question, but before I do that, I completely agree. I think for me, neuroscience will become a big part of coaching in the future. I think but I realize there's so many gaps in the way I've taught things. So, for example, with Magda, if I'm watching Sinner and Alcaraz or Djokovic or Serena, I think the thing that makes them so special is knowing what's going through their mind in certain situations. And I don't know if coaches have we sat down and taught our players at 15-30 4-all in the third final set what kind of things should be in your mind, what shouldn't, what thought processes should we be having? Because if there's one thing I could take from Alcaraz, for Magda, it would be how he thinks the game. He feels momentum, he feels moments. And I don't know, as coaches, do we ever really address that? We tell everyone to be positive. We have the generic sayings and these kinds of things, but I'm not sure that I don't think we're doing the players justice in terms of what we expect them to be thinking. Whereas, when I was in school 20 years ago in primary school or high school, I think the way they're teaching then versus what they're teaching now, when I look at my nieces and nephews, they're learning completely differently now how they did when I was back in school.
Right.
And I think tennis coaching is going to go that way. The thing is, I don't have the answer. I don't know exactly. I really question if we're doing things the best way. We're doing the best we can with the knowledge we have today, but I don't know if that's, I'm sure it's going to change. I just would like to know, like you've given us a synopsis there of how you think it can change. Yeah, I'm rambling again.
Mark, I think school teachers had to change it just because of the way that you came out. I think that was the motivation.
Exactly. They see their past mistakes and they have to rewrite the books. John, I'm taking all the time here, Candy. I'm sorry, but I wanted to ask John, are you in favor, a proponent of on-court coaching during matches like they used to be on the WTA?
As opposed to what we're doing now?
As opposed to what we're doing now.
I think what we're doing now is perfect. I don't think it needs to be any more, but I also don't think it needs to be any less. I like same side coaching. I like keeping it short and sweet because there's a difference between guiding and directing. And I don't want a player that requires me to direct them because I'm not playing. I want a player that can look to me for guidance in key moments, or if they're trying, they're working the problem, but they they find the right solution to the wrong problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we can just say, no, it's not that. Like your backside mechanics are fine. It's your toss. Just fix your toss. Just so in that moment, we resolve the issue. They don't have to keep searching and chasing, trying to solve the Rubik's Cube when they already have, the colors on the sides. It's done, right?
Yep.
I think more than that disenfranchises the player. It doesn't give them enough autonomy. It doesn't give them enough freedom to think and move within the space of the court. I also think it puts more power and control in the hands of the coaches, and I don't agree with that. As an athlete, I don't want a coach controlling me. I want a coach guiding me and leading me.
Would you not say though that with that, because I will say I'm of the opposite opinion on this. I preferred the on-court. I thought I could have more of an impact, negatively and positively. I can certainly say I came on and helped Magda to win a match, and I certainly came on and ensured she lost matches with what I said.
Right.
I think that the best time for me to teach or suggest to Magda the best ways to deal with things would be during the competition. I think that's a really good time in that environment. And for me, I feel that these players on the men and women's side, ATP, WTA, are paying a lot of money for our services. And the time that they need our services, probably arguably the most, is during a match, which is where I feel my value can be most, not most, because I think the practice court is very valuable, of course, but I think that there's that option, especially if I'm working with a girl that's maybe 18, 19, and she needs that help. And I just question whether of all the other sports, I don't see any others that don't allow it the way tennis does. And I personally miss it, but I have realized, to my surprise, that I'm actually in the minority. When I've spoken to most coaches, they don't like the on-court coaching as well. So I am in the minority for sure.
I do find it interesting that you have the position that when you feel you're most valuable is when the player should be doing the most work. See, I flip-flop it. On the practice court, that's when it's 90% me, 10% player. Because that's the teaching and learning opportunity. And this goes back to something that Nadal said, several years ago. The practice court is where you learn, and the match is where you apply what you learn. So I go.
Would you then argue with college tennis? Because college, for example, is a great transition place for players to learn, and they obviously have the on-court coaching. I think the ITF now has allowed. It's not on-court. You may know better than me. I know they're allowing it now. I agree with you. Probably, I would say the practice court for me is the most important. I do feel there's a strong part to me though that feels that Magda is paying for me to be there. She's paying for my services. I'm sure that she would rather have my help and win the match and maybe not learn the lesson that we could have learnt had she lost, but be $50,000 in the profit column rather than the loss, and we'll talk about the lesson that could be learnt tomorrow. That would be a counter to that. But as I said, I'm definitely in the minority on it. It seems like not many people support that.
Yeah. So it's funny because I did a talk on this at Roehampton this year, coaching for growth, and yes, arguably, yes, from a financial perspective, the player would rather necessarily have you there to add your input so that they could win the match, get a plus on the balance sheet instead of a minus, and then worry about learning the lesson later. So my counter to that counter would be, when is it ever a good time to be uncomfortable enough that you're willing to sacrifice short-term pain for long-term growth? And that's where I place a pretty hard line in the sand, because it's a long game. Are you playing the long game or are you playing the short game? And how old is Magda?
32.
Okay. Slightly different. She's a few years older than Taylor. Okay. So a little bit farther down the road. And then we contrast that, Taylor's a couple of years younger, and then you've got the 18, 19-year-old who's a couple of years younger. So different stages for different players. I might be inclined, out of 10 times, I could say, well, I'm going to stay hard on the teaching and the learning of the lesson. Maybe in Magda's situation, I back off 50% of the time, right?
Because I agree. I've said, though, I felt that Magda learns far more from a win than she does from a loss. Because after a loss, it's the job that I found that I fall into is more of one of building up self-esteem and confidence again, reassuring, sort of picking up the wounded, so to speak. When she's won, she's far more open to criticism, comments, feedback. And so, my argument with the WTA with this policy was also, look, you don't have to use it, right? If Taylor, for example, she doesn't like on-court coaching and you don't like it, there's no obligation for you to use it, but it's there if you want it the once a set like we had. I completely get. I also feel that if we're gonna, I thought it was something on a completely, different idea, is that it brought some entertainment for the fans, some interaction. I thought it did have some value there. But again, I know a lot of coaches felt a little bit of their privacy was taken away, and so I understand that. But no, your points are valid. I sit on the other side of the fence with that, and I'm interested to know different opinions.
Yeah, and I respect your viewpoints as well. I think you raised some very, very poignant objections to not having it. I also agree. I think it would be a bit more fan inclusive and interactive if you could see, kind of the interaction between coach and player. But there's also that, are you creating a Frankenstein there?
Yeah, 100%.
Just from the commentary side of things at Cincinnati, which I was doing last week, both of the coaches' boxes were well mic'd up, because sometimes they are mic'd up, but then the coaches cover them up with towels. Right. But these ones, it wasn't possible to do it. That's more on the ATP side. The coaches are a bit naughtier. But it was really interesting because I did the match that Coco lost to Yulia Putintseva, and we could hear very loudly Jean-Christophe Farrell and then occasionally Brad Gilbert chipping in. And they were really trying to encourage Coco to brush the back of the ball and keep the racket speed. So just little nitpicky things. Obviously didn't help in the long run because she lost. But are you two happy with that the world essentially gets to hear what you are saying to your player?
John, go ahead. I'll let you start.
I was up to you, Mark.
Okay. I will say that's part of the reason I don't love it. And at the WTA coaches meeting we had up in Toronto about 2 weeks ago, one of the issues that's come up is for me, and I don't know, John, if this bothers you, is that sometimes the seating that we get for matches is really frustrating.
Yes.
You know, whether you're sitting right behind the umpire's chair so you can't see half the court.
Right.
You're sitting, you know, in Prague a couple of weeks ago, I've got people basically, you know, on either side of me. It's a single seat sitting either. So everything I say, they know what I'm saying. And that's where I'm. Yeah, that's nothing to do with me. That's coincidence. But where I preferred the on-court was that actually could be between me and Magda, and I didn't like that the seats were able for everybody to hear. I have no problem with other coaches coaching. I do think that, you know, every sport has, I mean, you look at boxing as an individual sport, they have their during the rounds, they can talk with the coach or the trainer. Golf has the caddy with them the whole way around. I don't, other than maybe table tennis, I don't know of any other sports that really don't allow it during the game.
Right.
But yeah, over to you.
I think regarding the microphone situation, I don't have a particular objection to it. The seating situation is horrendous at times. Wimbledon, we were sitting literally 7 feet away from the other team's box. I don't understand.
Yeah.
We've got a whole big stadium. You couldn't figure out how to put us on our.
It's insane. It's insane.
Now, you know, we have no issue from our box maintaining decorum, but that could be a recipe for disaster in some camps, right? I think they should definitely consider that when laying these things out. As far as being mic'd up, I don't have a particular interest in, you know, sharing every single thing that we do. But to be honest, I speak in code 90% of the time anyway. So if you can decipher it, go right ahead. Real time, like go for it. Anything that I'm not saying that's a technical thing that's not coded, I don't care if you hear it because it's probably positive anyway. So, you know, it's directing some type of positive behavior. Like, hey, take a breath. You're good. You know, it's not as bad as you think. You're closer than you think. I don't care. I don't care who hears that. I'm fine to put those types of messages out there because if people are resonating with that, then that energy is resonating as well. And then we're for sure going to have the desired effect, which is to change the energy and momentum. So I don't particularly have an issue with that, but I can understand how that might be a problem for some coaches.
Yeah.
We need to understand the coding thing a bit more, John. You can't leave us hanging with that. So are you kind of tweaking your nose and popping your ear and things like that?
You know what? It's the way we train. Every culture has their language, and we have ours as well. It's one of the things I was very big on in the beginning. So no, it doesn't matter. I mean, I could, Mark, if the girls were playing each other, we could be sitting right next to each other, and I could be giving Taylor detailed instruction on what to do tactically, and I'm not giving away anything that would easily be discernible.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
through your eyes,
You need to work on your
you would see it.
Yeah.
your coding.
But it's the way
Exactly.
it's the way we do things.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Sorry, Kenny, go ahead. I think you were going to jump in.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to ask John, you were talking about track and field earlier, so I'd love to know your history. Are you a tennis guy from birth, or have you gone other ways and come into tennis?
No, I'm not. I'm definitely not a tennis guy from birth. I got involved with tennis as an aficionado, a spectator, right around the time that Federer was beginning his ascent. So that puts us somewhere around 2003-ish, 2004. And from that period, I started working with juniors and coaches, and then it, you know, kind of just snowballed from there. But while all of that was going on, no, I was working with, you know, NFL guys, NBA guys, Major League Baseball, and then track and field pretty much from, I want to say, 2005. I mean, I had athletes in every Olympic Games up until 2016, and then I thought I would not have any in this games, but it turns out I did have one. So
Yeah.
Can you reveal who that was?
His name is Harrison. He's a decathlete for the U.S. So
Wow.
I did not do a whole lot of hands-on work with him. I did some very early on in his high school career, and then kind of poked my head out of the ground when they had issues that needed to be resolved after he went to university. But by majority, I've been mentoring his coach for a long time. So,
And
That's
you
awesome.
say you've been mentoring them. So is that, would you say, your number one skill set to get psychologically the best out of your athlete, whoever you're working with, whichever sport?
yes, so I've figured out the human body to a very high functional degree, and then I realized that the body without the mind is useless. So I then figured out, okay, well, if we're really going to have effective measures and be able to create long-term sustainable change, we have to use the body to train the mind. And tennis is a perfect sport for that, which is one
Absolutely.
of the that I kind of slid right in and found a little niche because it involves so many components and it's so physical. There's no way to get around the physicality of it, right? It doesn't matter what type of player you are. Tennis is still a physical sport. So
Oh yeah.
we can use that and then integrate the situations and circumstances that will facilitate the growth of the mind.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
So it's fun.
Mark,
Always learning.
anything from you?
Always. No, I don't want to take too much John's time. I mean, it's really good to speak to somebody that's open about what they do, and I think that's always the interesting. I always often think some of the best podcasts are when you're sitting in the restaurant at the player, in the player restaurant at a tournament, and you see coaches just chatting with each other, and they just, you're disagreeing and agreeing and talking about ideas, and I think that's really interesting to listen to other coaches' philosophies and methodologies.
Do you have that interaction? This is a personal question now.
Sure.
But do you have experience witnessing a large amount of that interaction? Here's why I'm asking.
No, sure, go ahead.
Because the majority of my interactions, although great, they're pleasant, they're cordial, they're even comical most of the time, I would say they're superficial, they're surface level. We're not talking about complex or in-depth problem solving.
But why do you think that is?
I mean, the obvious would be nobody wants to reveal their hand, or nobody wants to.
I'll stop. Let me jump in there. I don't think for me, I would take the argument that nobody has a hand to reveal.
That's where I was going.
I think
it's either or.
Yeah, yeah.
Either or. Either I don't want you to know what I know, or I don't want you to know what I don't know.
What I don't know.
Yeah.
That's more what I think. I think there's such a fear of coaches, and it's a tough job, right? In that, we have a lot of hats to wear, whether it's psychology or hitting or feeding balls or driving the car. There's a lot of different things. So coaches almost get this idea that they should know and be expert in everything, and you can't. And so whenever we have problems, I have a bunch of people I reach out to. What do I do here? I cannot figure this out. It's even the amount of times I've had something I'm doing in the house, and Magda's come over and helped me and said, well, why didn't you do it this way? I didn't even cross my mind to do it that way, and she saved me an hour because she sees the problem completely differently. So that's why I think it's really important that we have, obviously, Ian Hughes helps me and Magda out, and it just so many times I think he shortcutted me. I maybe would have got there eventually, but he saved me a lot of time to get there. Right. He was a catalyst. So I just feel like, what you said, I agree completely. A lot of these coaches, for me, it's a fear of maybe appearing as if they don't know enough, or perhaps not knowing enough. But I think the art industry as a whole can do a better job of helping each other to get better and making the standards, increasing the standards.
That's fascinating to me. That's like a source of incredible humor, because how do you get the gold bar or gold check or whatever, the gold medal, as a coach if you don't know everything.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I
I,
think we've hit the
I,
jackpot with our podcast then, because the coaches we've had on recently, Arena Camellia Begu's coach, Victor, and then we've had Ashton Kruger's coach, Michael Joyce. The coaches we've had on, I think, have been quite educated, quite thought-provoking, as you are, John, you are always, Mark. You know, you're actually having things that you can disagree on and talk about, but you're saying, Mark, that you don't think that's actually the norm.
Yeah, I would say the same with John. I think we have a lot of superficial relationships with coaches that you see. You know, you want to be friendly with your peers, right? You're seeing them, you're working with them most of the time. I felt like when I first started coaching, and if you ask Ian as well, who's been around longer than me, it used to happen a lot more. It was more commonplace to have dinners with other coaches and chat, basically just exchange ideas and steal or borrow an idea or ask for help. Doesn't seem that it happens that much now. It's very close knit groups, and that's, you know, I'm sure, John, you have a few people that you maybe speak to. I have mine, but I don't think there's enough of that stuff, and I don't really have a solution, maybe there isn't one needed, but I don't know how it can. I think the more the conversations that coaches have with each other, the better coaches they'll become, the more they'll help their players, which is ultimately our goal.
I agree. I mean, iron sharpens iron. Yeah. So if we continue to stay on our own individual islands, then it's going to be very difficult to advance and evolve the sport. I wanted to be at the meeting in Toronto. I was looking forward to that. I RSVP'd and everything. Unfortunately, the schedule didn't work out that way. I was on court,
You can't.
right? Which is kind of another thing that, you know, if you really want to be as inclusive as possible with as many minds in the room as you can gather, then a little bit more forethought in terms of scheduling probably wouldn't be a bad idea, right? And this is on the WTA ATP side.
Yeah.
But also, where is the ongoing efforts and forums, venues that you can have debates, you can have non-threatening challenges? Like, why aren't we regularly, we're on the WTA side, why aren't we regularly engaging with coaches on the ATP side in the exchange of information? There's no direct threat. I understand, Mark, if you don't want to share with me the secrets of, you know, how you improve serve mechanics. I get it, right? Our girls are going to play each other at some point in time. You don't want to give away whatever. I can respect that. But if you're the coach of Sinner,
Yeah.
come on, like,
Here's one thing I'll say, and I'm not defending the WTA, but the last couple of years I've been a little bit more involved, whether it's going to meetings, etc. And yeah, I agree that with those meetings they could do a better job of scheduling, or maybe even recording the event so that people that couldn't make it can at least see what was discussed. The one thing that's very sad is that, you know, about a year ago I proposed actually a practice schedule change the way they do some things with scheduling and the practices. I thought there was a lot of inequality, should I say, in the way practices are done based on who you are, what your last name is, where you're from. And I felt that there should be a big separation between giving players commercial advantage, i.e., I want to bring in Azarenka because she was a number one in the world. She's a multiple Grand Slam winner. Completely get that for the tournament. Give her extra hotel rooms. Give her the private jet. Pay her the appearance fee. I have no problem with that. I do have an issue when you give her a competitive advantage where she gets to practice 2 or 3 hours alone on a court while Magda's sharing for 45 minutes. So I think there's got to be a distinction. But one of the things was they passed out the survey to all WTA coaches. We're talking about a less than 20% response rate to the email questions that they're asking about, you know, different changes in policy. And, you know, and I know the scheduling of these events isn't always great, but I think there was less than 10 people that showed up to that meeting. And I know that some coaches had matches or practice. I get it, but there's no way 100 people or 100 and however many coaches. It was just people sort of aren't interacting. I think it's very much a out for yourself mentality, and it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. My win is not necessarily your loss. So I think that there can be better things done with that. But yeah,
I think that's a great point. I'd love to hear and be a part of more dialogue surrounding topics and conversations like that, because the whole concept of zero-sum gaming, when you're trying to evolve in an organization, a company, a movement, a mindset, it becomes self-defeating. So if we're not all trying to figure out how to work together as individuals, then we are essentially figuring out how to work apart. And
yes,
it's
agree.
tough to move everything in the right direction when everybody's going in different directions.
I can't remember the exact saying about everything, all pebbles rise with our rising tide, right? It's if we bring everyone, if the whole tide comes up, then everyone's going to come up with it. Yeah. So I think that we can do a better job of I just think that there's a lot of areas to improve in the coaching side. And yeah, it was great to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing yours as well. And I love it when people don't agree with me. So it makes for interesting conversation. I mean, when you surround yourself with yes people, you never learn anything.
No, you can definitely spend some time with Magda then anytime you want, because she never agrees with anyone. So yeah.
This is being recorded for quality assurance.
Yeah, exactly. I've got my disclaimer at the front.
Knows everything that happens.
Right.
Yeah, she's given up.
Right, one final question, John, because we've had a lot of your time and we're very appreciative. Part two, as I said earlier. You obviously got to the quarterfinals in Toronto from qualifying, lost to Emma Navarro. You got to the round of 16 in Cincinnati from qualifying. You lost to the eventual champion, Jessa Pegula. Just give us a sense of what's evolving for Taylor. Why is she playing so well right now? And perhaps finally, what you hope for the US Open.
So as far as why I think she's playing so well now, the pieces, the puzzle pieces, another analogy I use a lot in training, the puzzle pieces are coming together. She's identifying which one needs to go where. She's not overplaying as much as she used to. Many times she would be in a situation where she thought she needed to do a whole lot more than she actually needed to do. And I think that understanding of balance, between her abilities, her attentions, and what the opponent's doing at that particular moment has gotten better. So she's become, her vision, her discernment has improved, and that has allowed her to play more of her game the way that she wants to play it. And whenever you have a player, I think it was Bruce Lee that said that the most difficult thing in the world is for a person to be 100% authentically themselves. And that's really difficult to do in tennis. It's really difficult to do outside of tennis. So she's finding the way to do that now, and it's coming together. It's looking nice for her. As far as the US Open, I never project into the future. I'm honestly one ball at a time. And as long as she continues doing what she's doing, then we can hope that the results are going to be the same. I'm not big on expectations at all. I don't project expectations, but we're very process focused, and that's what we lean on. We lean on our processes and our systems.
Well, you're doing a lot right, John. Thank you very much for joining us. It's really kind and so fascinating to hear you. And I'm so looking forward to Taylor Townsend versus Magda Linette in the first round of this year's US Open.
The finals, I'd prefer the finals.
I would prefer the finals as well, but
yeah.
Whatever needs to be, needs to be. So
exactly.
That would be ironic, wouldn't it?
Fantastic. Well, thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, John. Thanks so much.
Good time.
Thanks, John Williams, Mark Gellard, and me, Candy, saying thank you very much for listening and watching Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. Don't forget, we're sponsored by the ERT 300, and you can get your discount by going to the website and putting in tennis podcast. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
And hopefully see you in New York.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.